Hello, you're watching India's World with your host Rajat Kane. In this edition of the show, we'll go into the details on takeaways from Vice President Venkaiah Naidu's visit to two Latin American nations, Paraguay and Costa Rica. During his 8-day visit, Vice President of India stressed on strengthening the bilateral ties between India and Latin American nations as well as the Central American nations. This visit also assumes greater significance for being the first ever visit by an Indian Vice President to Paraguay. Now, during his visit, Mr. Naidu sought the support of two countries for India's bid for permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council, apart from pushing for strengthening the cooperation in various areas, including trade, culture, and science and technology with Paraguay and Costa Rica. In his high-level talks with the leadership of both the nations, the Vice President stressed on the menace of terrorism and how it's posing a grave threat to global peace and stability. Outlining a common desire to take an uncompromising stand against terror, the leadership of two countries agreed to cooperate to deal with the menace of terror. And the Vice President was also conferred an honorary doctorate by the University of Peace, founded by United Nations Organization, for its contribution to the rule of law, democracy and sustainable development in India. In his acceptance speech, the Vice President underlined that India has been an ardent and consistent champion of peace since time immemorial, and he was privileged to have received this honor when the world is commemorating the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, the extraordinary apostle of peace. To discuss further the importance of Latin America and Central America in diplomatic and strategic sphere for India, we joined with our guest, former Ambassador Jayant Das Gupta, former Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, and strategic analyst KP Nair. Thanks all of you for joining the show, sir. In this 8-day visit by the Vice President, he emphasized a lot on the menace of terrorism. The Paraguay gentleman has condemned the Pulwama terror attack, and Vice President also emphasized on the threat of terrorism, not just on India, but at the global level. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, let us start with you. Like, how important are Central American nations and Latin American nations for India fight against terror?
Rajat, our global footprint is steadily growing. India's stock in the world has never been as high. I'm heartened to see that there is tremendous interest in what India does, in India's soft power and India's potential, what India has to offer. And Vice President's visit has been a significant visit in that he has made it a mission to reach out to Latin American countries. You would recall that earlier in November he had visited Guatemala, Panama and Peru. This time he has been to these two important countries. And yes, terrorism is a global menace. There is no country in the world which has remained unaffected by terror. The degrees may vary, the kind of terror that they face may vary.
Right.
Latin American countries have been more afflicted by narco-terrorism, and but they understand the pains and the rigor and the devastation that terror causes. And the world is at one today. The important thing that has happened in the last few years is that there is a global fatigue, rather revulsion against terror. And you would have seen, we have all noticed how after the Pulwama attack, the world as one reacted with abhorrence against terrorism which emanates from our neighborhood.
Right. I mean, you actually left at the point where I could start with, like, I mean, Vice President also emphasized on the cross-border terrorism. So, how can Latin American countries help us in charting that narrative that India is deeply affected by the cross-border terrorism? How that narrative can be strengthened?
I think the first point is that India needs to sensitize other countries, and countries which are in South America, which are quite distant from us. They may not know the full details,
right,
barring the major countries like Brazil, Argentina, etc., or Mexico. So that is one very important message which would definitely have been put across by our Honorable Vice President. The second thing is there are various international fora in which collective action against terror financing, against countries which are harboring or actively abetting terrorism, that is dealt with. For instance, the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. There are other agencies also. And the votes of different countries count, their opinion counts. And we should not forget that Paraguay is a very important member of Mercosur, and so is Costa Rica in terms of the CAFTA DR FTA with the US. So they have a considerable degree of heft, but that apart, it is important for us to have as many friends and allies as possible in our global fight against terrorism.
Mr. Nair, India's growing footprint in Latin America, how far do you see we have this area to explore, considering that our footprint in that particular area, maybe because of distance or logistics, was not to the potential? So now are we exploring potential to the greater heights?
You see, it appears to me that Vice President Venkaiah Naidu has taken a special interest in the region, judging by his previous visits and also his interaction when he is in Delhi at Latin American fora, meetings with visiting leaders, accounts of such meetings with the Vice President. But on this particular visit, I want to emphasize that the Vice President is very good at spotting unusual opportunities and capitalizing on it. And I noticed during this visit that on International Women's Day, his meetings, it so happened, but he made the most of it. His meetings were primarily with women leaders in Costa Rica, the trade minister of Costa Rica is a lady. The minister in waiting during his visit was a lady. So, and at the business forum meeting that he had in Costa Rica, I think judging by the speech by the Costa Rican minister, she was very enthused by the Vice President's initiatives. And it so happened that it was on International Women's Day, and she was very forthcoming. Her speech was remarkable in the sense that she went beyond the normal statistics that one would unveil at a business forum meeting or commercial details and all that. And I think this will take us forward a lot, because Latin American countries are quite high up on women's empowerment. I'm not talking of ordinary women, but leaders. Michelle Bachelet, she was president of Chile twice. The present president of the UN General Assembly, she's a woman, and let us not forget that Vijayalakshmi Pandit was there as the first woman president of the women's of the UN General Assembly. In fact, the current president of the General Assembly came to Delhi and met another lady, Sushma Swaraj, before she took office and all that. And I think visits of course are important, but the most important aspect is slicing out something on which we can build on. And by doing this on International Women's Day, I think the Vice President set the stage for a new stage of expansion in our relations with Latin America.
Well, that's true. I mean, Vice President has often emphasized on the upward mobility of women on all the sphere. But sticking once again to the point of terror, I mean, during the high-level talks with the Paraguayan leadership has assured that they would back India's bid to UN and other UN forums for the permanent bid for the seat. I mean, is it an important takeaway, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash?
Well, it is certainly an important takeaway, and I'd like to give you an example of how important these visits are. It reminds me of June 2016 when Prime Minister Modi stopped over at Mexico for just 5 hours. And he met with the president, who drove him to an Indian restaurant for food, and dropped his objection to India's membership of the Nuclear Suppliers Group.
Okay.
And accepted that. I mean, and Mexico, for example, is a member of the Coffee Club, which is opposed to it. So these all countries have their self-respect, have their ego, and they feel very happy, they feel wanted when Indian leaders visit them. And as I said, the stock of India is very high. India is going to be the 3rd largest economy in the world. We have been an aspirant for the permanent membership of the UN Security Council. And also our soft power is something that we can be very proud of. So these and many other factors, well, let's not also forget the Indian diaspora. Yeah. Even in geographically small countries like Paraguay or Costa Rica, Indian diaspora is there, highly educated, playing a prominent, active role, which is very well respected. So given the totality of circumstances, I'm happy that we are also now looking west with growing interest and growing focus. And I would regard Vice President's visit to these countries as a significant message that we are as interested in Latin American countries, and today geographical distances can be bridged. So we can bridge it through soft power, bridge it through regular interactions, and I am seeing that is what is happening, and I welcome this.
By soft power, would you like to elaborate? What exactly do you mean by soft power? What are the spheres that the two countries, and considering it was the first ever visit by any Indian Vice President to Paraguay, so why soft power?
A concrete example. The President of Paraguay told Honorable Vice President that 25 years ago, when he was a student, he had visited India, and he had developed a lot of respect for Mahatma Gandhi. And every year till date, even as the President of this country, he reads a book on Mahatma Gandhi. And he loves Indian cuisine. Now, one visit to India has this kind of an impact. That is the civilizational strength of India. And I have found in my long years as a diplomat, yoga, cuisine, India's music, culture have a lasting impact. And we in fact, for that matter, Bollywood. And this is the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, and many countries are observing it. Yoga is becoming an international movement.
Right.
So that is the kind of strength that of India's culture or India's soft power, because regardless of your ethnicity, religion, background, civilization, you can adapt facets of that. And it is not coercive, it is optional. So, and we should, I think, utilize our soft power, kind of expose the world to India's cultural heritage, which we are doing.
Right. So, you also think that exploring the region of soft power, or the domain of soft power, is important for India vis-a-vis Latin American and Central American countries?
I do think that it is a very important factor in building up a successful commercial and economic relationship, because all relationships start from a personal front with person-to-person interactions. And as my friend Vishnu was mentioning, a short visit of 5 hours by the Indian Prime Minister to Mexico enabled us to make a huge difference to the NSG deliberations. So we should have as many friends as possible, and the soft power that we are trying to project is, of course, something which is optional. It is something which is open to the other side to either accept or have a neutral attitude towards it, or not accept it. Sure. There is no forcing of anything, any opinion on anybody else. So that is why it is extremely important. First, we build up people-to-people interactions, relationships, and then trade flows.
Gupta, just one more thing I would like to add. Like during his high-level talk in Paraguay, he also emphasized in the sphere of agriculture, hydroelectric and solar energy and health. How far we can go in these areas, considering these are the new avenues?
Paraguay is basically an agriculture-dependent country. There aren't too many industries there. It is also landlocked, but it has certain resources. For instance, the world-famous Iguazu Falls. That is in the border of Brazil, Paraguay, and perhaps a third country, Argentina. Now, it has a huge hydroelectric power project. It also has untapped power potential. So, it could provide us with some kind of a synergistic relationship if we could provide them with technology, with investments. And if investments could follow for something which can exploit low cost hydroelectric power. There are various industries which India has, which are suffering on account of comparatively high energy costs. So those are the kind of industries which can be set up. We have a very good trade relationship with Paraguay. Of course, it is not up to full potential because of logistical problems, because of the long distances. But Paraguay is the 5th largest producer of soya, for instance, and India is dependent a lot on imports of soya oil as part of its edible oil import package. So there are things on which we can cooperate. On solar energy, India has set up an industry which is trying to take giant strides in trying to meet the requirements which will come up over the next decade or so, when India makes the transition from fossil fuels to renewable sources of energy. And that is something on which we can also cooperate. We can provide the technology. And I must mention in this context that India has extended a number of scholarships under the ITEC program of the Ministry of External Affairs to Paraguayan students, whether they be in science, technology, engineering, other areas, management. So that is the kind of thing which will strengthen our bilateral bonds, the people-to-people bonds, and will facilitate areas of cooperation.
Mr. Nair, has the trade, if we talk of trade and talk of both Paraguay and Costa Rica, in last few years, what has been scenario? Has it gone up, or you think there is a lot India and these two countries can achieve?
Trade has gone up in both cases, but there are constraints, and the biggest constraint is connectivity. In the past also, we have attempted to revive trade with several of the countries, but in a way, putting trade is putting the cart before the horse, I mean, the opportunities are there, but how do you organize connectivity? I mean, even air, look at the situation. One of his hosts, the Vice President's host, said that this is the first time an Indian aircraft of any kind has landed on their soil, I mean, for us, aviation is a vastly expanding sector.
Right.
Yet, you have a situation where the hosts have to tell the Vice President that this is the first time an Indian aircraft has landed. Same thing applies to sea traffic, Venezuela, for example. Venezuela is willing to give us cheap oil. Venezuela's condition being what it is, unfortunately, they have to sell their oil, their sanctions and various other things. But how do you transport the oil? Venezuelans have some VLCCs, very large crude carriers, but they're constrained by the number of these carriers, you see. So even in a situation where India, because of its growth and development, needs energy, and here is a Latin American country which is willing to give us cheap oil, and yet we have the problem of transporting that oil, which is one of the reasons why our reliance on Gulf oil is so heavy. I am sure that the Vice President has been apprised of these problems, and follow-up is very important. And I hope that once the Vice President comes back, we will pay a lot of attention to the problem of connectivity, which is extremely important, because if connectivity is there, I think trade will follow.
Right. Ambassador Prakash, you agree there needs to be a lot to catch up in terms of connectivity, if we say, because geographical distance is so vast, and I'm talking of both Costa Rica and Paraguay.
Well, I was thinking about a very valid point made by my friend. I mean, connectivity is a factor, geography is a factor, but it's a bit of a chicken and egg. What comes first?
Right.
You cannot have connectivity unless there is traffic. You cannot have traffic unless there is connectivity. So, and there are the commercial considerations also. So, I guess the way to look at it is the connectivity better than it was earlier? Yes, it is. And with, I think, growing trade, growing tourism, growing people-to-people relations, connectivity will follow, is bound to improve.
Especially in Costa Rica, the Vice President emphasized on the shared values between the two countries, and a lot can be explored between the two nations. Right?
Very much so. In fact, in some regards, Costa Rica has done very well in terms of biodiversity, in terms of technology. It is one of the richest countries in the region. And, all these countries have their core strengths. And we have ours. So certainly, one of the advantages of interaction is that we gain from each other. Jayant was mentioning about Paraguay, which has a strong focus on renewable energy. In fact, by some yardsticks, they have the per capita largest use of renewable energy. And so all these countries have their strengths, and there is a strong interest towards India, and it's high time that we build on that interest.
Ambassador Jayant, from the point of view of strength, what are the areas like to emphasize between India and Costa Rica?
One of the things which we set up was a center of excellence for information technology. Now, Costa Rica had made rapid strides in developing information technology, and in fact, two of our companies, if I'm not wrong, Wipro and TCS, have set up bases there to cater to South American countries and to the US. And in comparison to setting up something in the US, it has been quoted by one of the companies that the costs are 15 to 20% less. Lower. So what we can do is, amongst many things, is to explore ways of accessing third country markets, for instance, for both goods as well as for services. And this could be a mutually beneficial kind of a relationship. The second aspect is that Costa Rica has it is one of the largest exporters of bananas, pineapples. For instance, Europe, you go anywhere, the pineapples are all from Costa Rica, and a host of other agricultural products in which they have harnessed technology for the benefit of farmers, and they have made a success of exports. We are trying to move away from cereal exports to horticultural exports. And this could be one of the things in which we could cooperate. We could learn from Costa Rica. We could invite them over to help us out and to spread the technology that we need, because, of course, we have a great deal of similarity in terms of the climate. So there would be lessons to gain from Costa Rica. So these are some of the areas in which cooperation, comes readily to mind. And it could be, of course, beneficial for both sides.
Mr. Nair, as the talks went on, there were also emphasis on not just terror, but also the menace which Latin American and Central American countries are facing, that is on the drug and narcotics.
Sorry?
On the drugs and narcotics. What is that sphere where India's relations, better relations with the Latin American and Central American countries can achieve?
Well, the two countries that the Vice President has been visiting, the drug problem is not so serious there, unlike in, say, Colombia or Mexico. But it's a problem that affects the entire region.
Yeah, Latin
I mean, some
Central
countries
American
it's a bigger problem, some countries it's a smaller problem. But the root of the problem does not lie in these countries.
Sure.
You see, the root of the problem is in the United States, because the United States is the market for these drugs, you see, because that's where drugs are bought at a very high price, and they go from here. But we have been very active in the UNDOC, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, and we have considerable expertise on what we have been doing there. We could perhaps share our expertise with these countries, you know. But I think we should also look at what are our strengths, you know.
Right.
I mean, we have a certain degree of strengths on fighting drugs and crime, but perhaps we should not fritter away our engagement and interaction with these countries on this when there are other opportunities. For example, mango, you know.
Okay.
I mean, these countries have mango, especially Paraguay, and we are so rich in mango, you know. And actually, mango diplomacy is something that was thriving at one time, but it's been sort of underemphasized, you know. I mean, after all, we shouldn't forget that our relations with the United States took a decisive turn when the United States allowed Indian mangoes to go there. And you know, we have some cooperation with the Philippines on mangoes. So perhaps cross-fertilization of mangoes. You know, I have tasted Latin American mangoes when I was living in the United States, and I regret to say that compared to our mangoes, they have no taste, you know. So mango diplomacy, for example, is something that we could emphasize on.
Right. Thanks all three of you for joining us. Thank you, gentlemen. So there we have to leave. So clearly a sea of opportunities between India and the Latin American and Central American countries to explore, and not just on the areas of terror and narco or arms, but also on the soft power aspect of agriculture, hydroelectric, solar energy, and also in the sphere of education. Thank you for joining us. Keep watching Rajya Sabha TV for more.